Dhaka, December 16, 1971. Jubilation is in the air. The crowds outside the city's racecourse are visibly ecstatic. Cheers can be heard loud and clear for the Indian Army and the Mukti Bahini that have emerged victorious in the 13-day war that is to see the creation of Bangladesh. No wonder the heart of All India Radio's special war correspondent swells with pride as he watches the signing of the document of surrender between India's Lieutenant General J.S. Arora and Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi of Pakistan. Squeezing himself next to them, one hand stretched out with a microphone, crouching on his knees, as no chair is readily available, the lone civilian amid the top brass of the Indian Army literally has a ringside view of the historic proceedings. Flashbulbs pop as the moment is captured for posterity. Freeze frame. The picture is splashed on the front pages of the world's newspapers, later to find place between the covers of books on the 1971 war and to be immortalized in a bronze plaque at the National Museum in New Delhi. A picture we are all familiar with. Most of us can identify General Arora and General Niazi. But how many of us know the third man in the front row in that iconic picture? Famously referred to as the voice of India, this suave, bespectacled gentleman was the first foreign correspondent to reach the war front in what was then East Pakistan. His mission? To document the war and bring it alive on the radio for listeners back home.
With that, this is Surajit Sen returning you to the studios of All India Radio.
Those were turbulent times when All India Radio was called upon to play a special role.
শোনো একটি বুঝি বরের থেকে লোক বুঝি বরের কণ্ঠ স্বরের ধ্বনি প্রতিধ্বনি আকাশে বাতাসে ওঠে রনি বাংলাদেশ আমার বাংলাদেশ বাংলাদেশ আমার বাংলাদেশ.
This anthem of the War of Liberation of Bangladesh, to the rousing beat of which the Mukti Bahini marched, was beamed from beyond their borders, from Kolkata, through All India Radio's transmitters.
Bangladesh, Amar Bangladesh.
Retired Army officer Anil Bhatt, who is now a strategic analyst and author, looks back at a pre-television era when we depended on the radio to bring the wars of 1962, 1965 and 1971 to our living rooms.
It is voices of these people, particularly Surajit Sen, which not just informed you, but which even in that very sober way gave you a bit of the excitement or the touching aspects of whatever was being reported, came across very lucidly. We remember daily reports. It was the daily reports which gave us what has happened in the course of the last 24 hours. I'll say voices of Surajit Sen, mellow, Neil Batra. And it just so happens that all three began their lives in the armed forces.
Years after the ceasefire, memories of that eventful day continue to remain with Surajit Sen. And despite the onset of Alzheimer's that had started fogging his mind in his later years, he would talk about his time in Dhaka. We bring you a recording from 2007.
I was in Calcutta when they flew me from here and they dropped me, find your way. And I was stuck near the Red Fort. And I said, I want to see the general. Then they said, there's no plane going. This is only an ammunition plane. And that'll be going tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. You've got to get in the plane. And that's how I went with an ammunition plane. No seat, nothing. But all the ammunition being taken to Bangladesh at the time. It was a thrill, the excitement to know what it is like.
A.K. Chandrasekhar was a neighbor of Surajit Sen in the leafy neighborhood of the Asian Games village in New Delhi.
We used to relate to me the incident, how he proceeded to go to the army as a volunteer from the INB ministry for keeping track of what was happening there and to relay back the information to the government. And he mentioned to me that he proceeded through the Meghalaya border into Bangladesh along with the army, which was proceeding from the border towards Dhaka along with Lieutenant General Jacob.
Former journalist Rajiv Theodore, who would often visit the veteran broadcaster in his Delhi home, recalls the time when the instrument of surrender was signed.
He was the first Indian correspondent to report on the surrender.
Sir, the first foreign correspondent.
Yeah, once you were there, you became a foreign correspondent. And then his commentary and dispatches were heard immediately after that, all across the globe, after the surrender. He was one of the main voices that emanated from that surrender area, from the Dhaka Air Base, basically.
Other than memories, as a press release issued by the Ministry of Defence states,
Surajit Sen also collected various letters from people who played a major role in the war, some photographs and mementos. One such memento is a Pakistani pistol, then presented to him by the Indian Army. It is a .32 weapon made in Peshawar.
talking about these precious possessions of his, Surajit Sen often recalled how he was offered quite a price for them.
Foreigners offered me money, the Americans, the Britishers, they offered me money, what material I had. You take whatever you want. I said, look, I don't sell myself. I said, this will go back to the government and it's for them. And I live with pride the fact that I did this job. Money doesn't buy you peace.
Yes, money was never a consideration. Honesty, integrity, and loyalty to his country were and remained uppermost for Surajit Sen. Years later, he decided to gift all the memorabilia he had to the Ministry of Defence for a war museum. The Ministry of Defence press release of 26 September 2005 went on to state,
Mr. Sen handed over historic artifacts, mementos and documents to the Chief of Army Staff for display in any services museum.
The then Chief of Army Staff, General J.J. Singh, who accepted this precious booty from Surajit Sen, recalls,
I had a very pleasant interaction with him, but it was very brief. The pistol which he handed over to me and I accepted on behalf of the Indian Army, that was passed on.
Sir, can we hope to see it in the upcoming National War Museum soon?
A little portion of the museum could be devoted to one of the very few war correspondents or war reportage which he did of the 71 war, plus the historic photograph where he is sitting along with General Niazi and General Arora. And I'm sure there will be a place for such important historical artifacts.
life seemed to have come full circle for Surajit Sen. After all, he had himself at one point been a proud young commissioned officer of the Indian Army. But on the advice of some fellow gentleman officers, he decided to pick up the microphone instead of the gun. This became a part of army folklore of the time, remembers Colonel Anil Bhatt.
The funny thing about Surajit Sen, stay in the army was that he kept getting told by his colleagues or seniors, what are you doing here? You may become at the most brigadier or a colonel. Why don't you go and make a name for yourself in newsreading?
Prophetic words indeed. And so, on the day after August 15th, 1947, 22-year-old Surajit Sen walked into All India Radio and was hired on the spot. And despite the presence of many stalwarts already there, he carved a niche for himself on the airwaves. Newsreading was an art, as Surajit often said to friends.
Remember this always. Anyone can say something into a microphone, but what matters is what comes out at the end. It holds the listener's interest, then you may depend upon it. And for those few minutes, the broadcasters become an artist.
It was only a matter of time before his listeners started noticing the powerful baritone and the measured delivery when they switched on the radio for the news.
This is All India Radio. Please stand by for the news.
Kabir Bedi, who joined All India Radio as a casual newsreader before making a name for himself in the world of international showbiz, remembers looking up to Surajit Sen.
I knew Surajit Sen during the mid-60s when I worked with All India Radio, where I began my career in Delhi. He was a big name and we were the youngsters on the block. So we had a lot of respect for him. But he had this great reputation and his voice was absolutely divine. So I will always look up to Surajit Sen as a great voice to remember.
Little wonder then he became an inspiration for many youngsters who would tune in not just for the news, but also to learn the nuances of English pronunciation from stalwarts like him. Anil Bhatt recalls the days when, as a young schoolboy, he would often listen to the news read by Surajit Sen.
It was a very characteristic. This is All India Radio. The news by Surajit Sen. Crisp, good English, properly spoken. And we in radio signal terminology, we have a term RSVP. Rhythm, speed, voice and pitch. Perfect.
He knew exactly, like he'd tell us, if there was a long sentence, the pauses, the right pauses in a sentence, you have to take a breath at a particular point in a sentence.
Spurthi Sinha, his junior colleague in the newsroom.
I remember him guiding me. I just thought that he is just very good on the air.
Talking of the first time he walked into the radio station in Delhi and met his senior colleague, fellow newsreader Vijay Daniels recalls his imposing and impressive personality.
His voice did match his large build and his big, clean-shaven, bespectacled face. He came through as a very affable, friendly and gregarious person.
Vijay Daniels goes on to outline what made Surajit Sen an inspiration.
Well, as a newsreader, Surajit was very conscientious, he was punctual and dedicated to his profession. I felt he delivered the news with a tremendous amount of objectivity. When I was his understudy, I watched him closely rehearsing the bulletins, and he had a very distinct style of rehearsing. He would scratch and strike off words in a sentence and then rewrite them at the end of the next sentence. And when asked why he did that, he said it would facilitate an even flow of reading. I can tell you something. It would have been a disaster if anyone else had to read his marked pages. Only Surajit could.
What made his voice distinctly deep and mellow? Vijay Daniels has an interesting tale to share.
His father had initiated him into drinking a potion made of a raw egg, lime and honey, which he said it had to trickle down his throat and which he said worked wonders for him. I'm not sure how many of us have tried this recipe for success.
Although he touched dizzying heights as a newsreader, Surajit Sen was not content to rest on his laurels. Says Spurthi Sinha,
he was always interested in sports. And then he took up hockey as a subject, which he loved very much. And he started anchoring and giving commentaries for, very small domestic hockey matches. That's where he got his experience. And then slowly he took up hockey in a serious way. He ended up such a good commentator that he was going abroad wherever India played. He was there, whether it was in Spain, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, all hockey playing countries. He was there and giving commentaries, and he became a very popular hockey commentator.
I've done the Munich games, I've done the many games. You are competing with the world's best. They're all there. And it's a question of how you get through at the pausing, silence, and when to stop and when to carry on. These are things that got to come from within you and not from external factors. You've got that, then you are an artist. If you haven't got that, you have no business to be there. Go home.
But the Munich Olympics were far from being a laughing matter. This was 1972, when members of the dreaded Palestinian terrorist group Black September took Israeli sportsmen hostage and slaughtered them. Rajiv Theodore recounts what Surajit Sen had told him about that fateful morning as the chilling events unfolded around him.
He heard some shots fired, that's what he told me, early in the morning at Munich, where he was staying, in this James village. He rushed out thinking what's happening. He heard a lot of shots. So he hid himself close by, and then he started writing in his notepad about what happened. He could see silhouettes of German police and some of the terrorists moving around. And the German police he saw, they were all in tracksuits. And even the terrorists were in tracksuits. So it was very difficult to find out who was the real terrorist and who was the cop.
There were hundreds of journalists present at the Olympic Village that day, reporting and broadcasting for the first time a terror attack in real time. Among them, Surajit Sen, who hid himself in a ditch and scribbled notes for his dispatch. Keeping the upcoming 1982 Asian Games in mind, Surajit Sen was appointed as head of sports in Doordarshan in 1981.
And now, before the pageantry comes to an end, we welcome the happy, the jolly, dancing baby elephant, Apu, the mascot of the 9th Asiad. But first, these performers, many of them will move on to the main stage, into that green patch where, from tomorrow, it'll be football, which will be the big draw in the evening. And thousands will be here to watch the top teams of Asia competing against each other in perhaps the most popular sport in the world, soccer.
From sports events to visits of foreign dignitaries, Surajit Sen had left a mark on all. Take, for example, these closing lines from his commentary of 24th February 1978, when the Vietnamese Prime Minister addressed our members of Parliament in the Central Hall of Parliament.
But before we return you to the studios, I would like to quote a little verse which I came across this morning in an article written by General Habibullah about Vietnam entitled, "All Free Men Salute Thee." And the verse goes as thus: "In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of fate, my head is bloody, yet unbowed." This is the tribute to the Vietnamese, a verse which I came across this morning. And with this, now members of Parliament also going out to the various doors, the entrances, and the Central Hall almost emptying. With that, this is Surajit Sen returning you to the studios of All India Radio.
I'm getting married in the morning. Ding dong, the bells are gonna chime. Pull out the stopper, we'll have a whopper. Get me to the church on time.
89-year-old Sushil Javeri, who succeeded Surajit Sen as the chief newsreader, has an amusing anecdote to share about the day Surajit had to go to Calcutta to marry his lady love.
There were two trains with the same name, Rajdhani, one plying Delhi-Calcutta and the other Delhi-Bombay, both departing at approximately the same time, at 4:20 in the evening. After his train steamed out of the Delhi railway station, a lady from the Hindi news of All India Radio, travelling in the same chair carriage, asked him whether that was to be his first visit to Bombay. He raised his eyebrows and proudly said he was heading for Calcutta to get married 2 days later, but she convinced him of the truth with a ticket and a gentle smile. He was shocked, dumbfounded, with mouth wide open. The first stop was Mathura, 80 miles away, where Surajit quickly got down. He caught the next return train to Delhi after 2 hours and went straight to the airport and got a plane for Calcutta 3 hours later. He married his lady as per schedule.
I got to get there in the morning, spruced up and looking in my prime. Girls come and kiss me, say that you'll miss me, get me to the church on time.
Spurthi Sinha recalls his work for All India Radio's newsreaders and staff artists who were hired on contractual basis.
Surajit Sen decided that there is no job security in this. You start off and then you worry whether you'll be there, you won't be there after 3 years. So he got together all the senior newsreaders of the other language units. They formed a guild. They went to the Labour Ministry, took advice. They got together and they advised the ministry to make them permanent government servants. About 4-5 years it took him, but he got what he wanted. That was when the post of a chief newsreader was created. So he became the chief newsreader. We then realized that what a big thing he has done for us, and where hundreds of us got the benefits.
Applause and appreciation came his way from many quarters, including the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. A note on the work he had done there reads,
In Bangladesh at that time, he showed commendable resourcefulness and imagination, covered the social and political scene immediately after the surrender, and provided 2 excellent features.
Despite having achieved starry success, Surajit Sen remained at heart the boy who grew up in the small town of Ranchi. His sister Lotika Ratnam's daughter, Premika, tells us in a message from the US of the time when Surajit lost his mother when he was barely 4 years old and was brought up by his father.
Homeschooled till the age of 10, as his father felt that school education was too limited, Surajit attended Bishop Cotton and completed his higher education from St. Xavier's College in Ranchi. The father had converted to Christianity, but ensured they retain their Indian names. My uncle Surajit loved the radio and listening to the news, and decided to be a broadcaster at a time when most people wanted to be doctors, engineers, or lawyers.
With a keen interest in history, he was inspired by the French Revolution and the American Civil Rights Movement. But, first and foremost, he was passionate about human rights and respect for the people. And, yes, dogs. He had quite a pack at home, most of which had been picked up off the streets.
You know, away from work, Surajit just loved his food, his wine and his dogs. He'd love to potter in the kitchen and turn out a few exotic Bangladeshi dishes. He was, if you ask me, in many ways a connoisseur of good food and drink. To crown it all, Surajit was chosen to play Bal Gangadhar Tilak in Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, where he had to only sit alongside the luminaries of the Indian freedom movement. He didn't have a word to say, but he still carried it off with his big frame and large face. He made an excellent character as a Tilak.
The voice fell silent on 6th May 2016. Unfortunately, he suffered terribly from age-related complications. Yet, as in the lines from the poem he quoted, His head was bloody but unbowed. Rajiv Theodore pays a tribute.
Whenever we used to chat, there was never a dull moment. He has a characteristic booming laughter, and he used to talk only positive things, and he was a real gregarious soul. And when he fell ill, and he was completely bedridden, he had a beam on his face still, and he will never used to talk about his debilitating effect he had on his body. It shows that he has this undying spirit throughout, till the end.
With failing health and failing memory, he could still feel inspired and quote one of the stalwarts of the broadcasting world, Hilda Matheson, the first director of talks at the BBC.
Hilda Matheson, the famous writer on broadcasting, said, "What counts in broadcasting is a sense of life, whether you be an entertainer, in education, in music, or any other kind of program. It provides an intimate touch between human beings who might otherwise never come within a hail distance of each other. It enhances the factor of personality. This is true of broadcasters and listeners."
Yes, what counts in broadcasting is a sense of life, whether it be in entertainment, in education, in music, or any other program. It provides an intimate touch between humans who might otherwise never come within hail of each other. It enhances the factors of personality. All who knew this legendary broadcaster in his prime will know that this quote was true of Surajit Sen.